Hi everyone, geophysicist Stefan Burns here with breaking news on the sun. We have just had the strongest solar flare in more than 2 weeks, and that's on top of a high M-class flare that we already had yesterday and some really gnarly plasma filament eruptions. Check this out. That blasted off yesterday. Also, a whole bunch of other plasma filaments blasted off yesterday. And we now have coronal holes rotating in behind these sunspots. So there is a surge in solar activity that is occurring right now. Sunspot numbers seem to be about to break through their limit that they've been at for more than a month now. Looks like we'll return to sunspot numbers over 200, which means that solar maximum is back. It never went away. We were just in the doldrums, you could say. And so this is a pretty fast breaking development. Things were kind of quiet until yesterday, and then just in the past hour, as we're reporting this live, we've had this 4.9 M-class flare, again the strongest in more than 2 weeks. So significant sea change as it relates to solar activity. And the reason why we have a solar maximum in general is because the sun is in chaos. This is not clickbait. The sun is in chaos. Solar maximum is when the magnetic field of the sun flips. And this is like a 3 to 4 year long process. Solar maximum is about 2 to 3, maybe even like 3.5, 4 years if you take some of the ascending, descending phase. But what happens is the magnetic field flips and you have the polarity of the southern hemisphere and the northern hemisphere, they swap. And during solar minimum, when the sun doesn't have any sunspots and does not look like this at all, it has stable polarity. Let's say this is negative polarity, positive polarity. But then it'll start to increase and the magnetic field gets totally chaotic. You have all this magnetic field actually bulge out from the center of the sun, creating these sunspots, these disturbances, which then fling energy out into space. And eventually, a few years later, it starts to re-emerge on the opposite side. So now this would be positive polarity and this would be negative polarity in this hypothetical example. That's, I'm just giving you an example. But the sun is in chaos right now. It will continue to be in chaos, technically, until about 2026, 2027. Chaos is an order beyond our understanding. And that's what the sun is. It has a certain order to it. We do know a lot about the sun. We see these magnetic bands that travel across and then terminate. But fundamentally, this is a chaotic process that we do not understand that well so far in the 21st century. And very likely, we're not going to understand the sun that well for quite a long time. But we do know a few things, and we see quite a lot happening with the sun. So let's get right into it. Let's first check out this 4.9 solar flare, because this is what just is like happening right now. So let me pull this up on the screen here, and we will get started with looking at the sun as it is right now. Here we have our sun in our 131 angstrom view. And this is just for the past 3 hours. This is SUVI imagery from the GOOS satellite. We see this 4.9 M-class flare there blast off from the western limb of the sun. This is solar coordinate system. So it's inverse from what you would normally think. This is the eastern side. This is the western side. This is the side that's leaving. And so we've had this solar flare blast off where just yesterday we had this really large plasma expulsion, basically, you could say, which triggered a very minor increase in proton flux coming in. And so we haven't seen an uptick in protons yet from this, but it is possible because this is a magnetically conjugate point. This is where the solar wind naturally kind of goes out, spirals out, and connects to the Earth from the western limb. So you really have to watch the western limb closely for when there are solar flares and coronal mass ejections, especially the ones that are impulsive, because they can really push and accelerate these ions like protons and others to relativistic speeds, close to the speed of light, and they'll then slam into the Earth and trigger proton radiation storms. This can cause, for example, blackouts for anyone that's operating like a radio, right? Shortwave, whatever. They all bounce their signals off the ionosphere, but if the ionosphere, the plasma of it, becomes supercharged, you could say, then the critical frequencies change and you have to alter your frequency band for shortwave radio, and sometimes you even get a complete blackout. That happens often from proton storms that are triggered by flares on the western limb. So perhaps we have more, right? This could just be almost like a foreshock flare, you could say. We see that sometimes where we get this rapid building up of activity. Let us look at our past 2 weeks of data. We're going to go back to the sun, but I just want to show you the past 2 weeks of data here because this will kind of put in context this upsurge that I'm talking about. Here we have our past 2 weeks of X-ray flux as measured again by the GOO satellite. This is at 5.6 Earth radii in the radiation belts. So it's a geosynchronous satellite that is some distance away from the Earth, but it's pretty close to home. It's measuring X-ray flux from 1 to 8 angstroms. This is like a soft X-ray. And this is one measure of light. Of course, there's the entire light spectrum going from 0 to infinity. We see visible light, right? The sun mostly emits infrared, visible, and ultraviolet light, but it also emits extreme ultraviolet light on the higher frequency part of the spectrum, and then even X-ray light. Very rarely it'll produce gamma rays. That's from really powerful solar flares though, like really powerful. So we just had this right here, this 4.9 M-class flare, and see this flare right there as well. That's like an M2 or an M3 or something. So we have been on this uptrend, but look specifically down here. We have shortwave and long wave. And so typically we look at long wave to kind of categorize solar flares, but we can also see some interesting trends if you look at shortwave and look at that just immediate change on the 20th going up. And so you can see that here as well. This is a log scale. We're measuring watts per meter squared. And so we do see that the overall wattage per square meter hitting the Earth is quite low in X-ray flux, but it can go up orders of magnitude, right? So you're in the C-class territory, and then all of a sudden you jump up to M-class, that's 10 times more. If you go up to X-class, now you're talking 100 times more than a C-class flare. And we just had this most recent jump from, kind of low middle, about 2 on the C-class, all the way up to 4.9, and perhaps, it goes like this. We have a lot of sunspots on the sun right now. We can go there next. Let us check out how sunspots have been evolving on the sun over the past 3 days, because that really tells you the tale of this chaos that we're seeing with the sun. Of course, again, as I mentioned, this chaos is ongoing for a while now and will continue to go on for a couple of years at least, but sometimes it kind of bubbles up from the surface a little bit more than normal. And we see that right here. Look at this sunspot group. This is sunspot 4000. So it's the 4,000th sunspot that's appeared on the sun with this solar cycle. And you see it just kind of really push out of nothing, showing that this magnetic field is pushing out from this underneath the surface of the sun, growing rapidly. You also notice a new sunspot group here also starting to kind of form and push out in the exact same region that sunspot group 4000 did. So it looks like there's some sort of structure there that's kind of maybe almost initiating these sunspots to grow. If we look down here at sunspot group 3998, we also see quite a rapid, you could say, expansion of that sunspot group over the past 3 days. So these are the sunspots that are on the Earth-facing side of the sun right now, and we see that we have had 2 sunspots rotate out. We have this one here that's been quite active, gave us just in the past hour, that 4.9 M-class flare. It is rotating off the disk. And so it decided apparently to start being active right as it was rotating out, but that is in that magnetically conjugate point, let's not forget. So we could have some enhanced relativistic flux from the sun because if that keeps flaring. But in terms of sunspot numbers, these weren't that significant, right? It's basically to see 2 big cores, but the number of sunspots within these groups here is quite high, and they still have some time to go. Meanwhile, we have new sunspots rotating into view right here. So it looks likely that our sunspot numbers are going to go up and break out of this downtrend that we've been in. I can show you, let me show you what I'm talking about. Here we have our sunspots going from December 21st, 2024 all the way to February 22nd, 2025. And we'll talk about this in a little bit. This is to put sunspots in context, but this is our most recent data right here. And what we see is that we've been having these pretty severe drops in sunspot numbers, kind of in this rhythmic fashion. You see this right here going all the way down to like 50 at the end of January, the real doldrums. And then we charge back over 150, and then mid-February here, we drop to, let's say, about 80 or so, maybe 85, right? We charge back up, slightly higher each time as well. It's like higher highs and higher lows. If you're someone that looks at any sort of charts financially, you can see the pattern. But we're talking about the sun here. But we're getting these higher lows, and this is also a shortened cycle too, but then this rapid increase. And this is telling you that there's been some sort of state change with the sun. How long it'll last, I don't know. But typically you get this like 28-day cycle like this, but something kind of broke that trend. And now our latest value for the February 22nd, that one's locked in, is right there at about, we have 150, 60, 170, 175. But again, those sunspots they have like 2 days at least until they even start to get close to the western limb. And so they could start to like kind of go away, disappear, you know, converge back into the sun. We do see that time sunspots appear, then they go back. But that doesn't seem to be the case, and we have new sunspots growing and new sunspots rotating in. So it seems likely that tomorrow and over the next couple of days, this number is going to break 200, which means that we're back in this territory. This data basically ends right where this one picks up, but you'll notice that the scale is different because this one goes all the way up to 300 in the number, whereas this one only goes to 200. So I didn't combine them together for that reason. But you see that we kind of were hitting this low as well back in mid-January. This is 14 right there, or the 14th, going to about 70 or so. This drop is lower. But then if you look back to December, we were all the way over 250 sunspots right there. So we were very high with our sunspots, and we may be coming back to that. So that is solar maximum. We've been in solar maximum, but there's kind of different phases to solar maximum, and that is what's happening right now. So we have a question from Axiel, who's asking what's pushing out of the sun. And this would be magnetic flux. Because the sun is flipping its magnetic field, it's actually pushing magnetic fields out of the sun that are more chaotic. And so we have, I can show you this. We have the sun, right? It's flipping its magnetic field. Sometimes those magnetic field lines, they kind of form these flux bundles and they push out, and that creates a sunspot. We actually have that dynamic also play out on Earth, and this gives us these anomalies in the magnetic field. Right now, we have the South Atlantic anomaly. In the past, we've had anomalies in like the Levantine and in Western Europe, and they travel across the globe. They can be lower strength, they can be higher strength. But on Earth, they take hundreds of years to push out, whereas on the sun, they can happen just in hours or days. But fundamentally, it's very, very similar, which is interesting. So let us look at some different wavelength views of the sun. Let us start with our 304 angstrom view. So we can see the different plasma filaments that blasted off over the past 24 hours. Because this is where we can see that there's been that state change. Plasma filaments are stable until they're not, and then all of a sudden they release. And so we saw how flux started to really change on the 20th of February. Sunspots have really been going up, and then we saw all these plasma filaments blast off yesterday. So it's almost like there's been some sort of new magnetic field shift that's destabilized a lot of these structures and that's blasting them off. So we'll go into the 22nd here. And you will notice some plasma filaments kind of blast off from the sun, but not that many. But if we go back to the 21st, we have this one right there, and then we have this one, and then we have some others that pop off too. There's also one that kind of launched from up here, fairly Earth direct. And there is right now a coronal mass ejection that is set to sweep by, it's a low confidence, but set to sweep by on the 23rd, so for tomorrow. So we could even have a geomagnetic storm tomorrow if that does hit. I can pull up that data as well. We can look at that in just a little bit, but I want to finish looking at the sun first. So big plasma eruption there. Let's actually punch in on that because that is really, really cool. Look at this plasma blast. This is what I have it called. You can actually see it like kind of contract and then blast off. You see it's all the magnetic fields twisted together, But if we come back in on this, watch this. It like starts to destabilize and then like contracts back, and then it finally launches off. And it's a good thing that was not Earth direct, because that would have slammed into us pretty hard. A lot of density to that plasma filament, which broke off. And a very complex filament too, not just a simple one. So it's almost, you know, some of these words sometimes are limiting in their ability to describe what happened. But this is really, really amazing. That's what happened yesterday. We can also look at our 131 angstrom view of the sun to see just the solar flare activity over the past 48 hours, not including today and not including this 4.9 M-class flare. But you can just in general see these bright regions here. And we have had some rotate out, but in general, these ones here are pretty much firmly centered on the sun. There's some flares there coming from Sunspot group 4000. And we have new bright regions rotating in behind these coronal holes, these dark spots. We'll look at that next. And so it looks like we're going to have this upsurge continue, and that this is not just a 1, 2, 3 day thing, that after, as these start to go here, new ones will come in. At that point, we don't know if sunspot numbers will go down, but at least for the next few days, it looks like sunspot numbers are going to continue climbing up. And if, yeah, look at that guy really going off. And if this is like some sort of flux bundle under the surface of the sun, it keeps generating these sunspots, right? Then we could be looking at some significant activity for a while. Thank you, Laura, for another super thanks. Awesome, that's incredible. So thank you so much. She says, this is awesome. Thank you for teaching us all. You do great work. Well, thank you again so much, Laura. Let's look at our coronal holes. We have some new open, basically fields, magnetic fields on the sun rotating on the Earth-facing side, soon to be Earth-centered and direct. Here they are. This is where the plasma temperature is lower. The magnetic field is more open, and these particles just flow out of them. And we see it here, here, and here. And I'm actually going to stop the video. I'm going to go all the way to the end for you. And so we get this. So we have kind of this like quite a large coronal hole feature. It's not one continuous coronal hole, but it is kind of all like forming a line of longitude there. So that's going to be really interesting. And we have it going above the equator, also below. And so if it's forming almost like a sheet of plasma, enhancing the solar wind going by like this, it looks kind of unlikely that the Earth is going to dodge that, because it's not just from one single region. It is kind of from this entire zone there. So the entire plasma sheet will kind of sweep by like this. Maybe we dodge it, but this is still developing too. If I turn the video back on, we see it rotating in. And then new, very bright active regions right behind. And so we're going to have to keep an eye on them. Just for anyone that watches the channel, you know, when there's a lot of solar activity, I'm reporting on it quite a bit. When we have solar doldrums, I'm not reporting on it as often. And during these solar doldrums, there's been a bunch of earthquake activity and volcanic activity. So that's what I've been covering a lot on my channel. Also, yesterday I talked about the grand planetary alignment that we have coming up on the 28th. We have a whole bunch of things happening. But when the sun starts to wake up, rest assured I'll be there to keep you in the know right away. Just because I'm not releasing a video on the sun doesn't mean there's a whole bunch of stuff happening. It's because in general, you probably don't need to really focus too much on it. Not much is happening. Well, now things are happening, folks. Thank you, Sharon Hennessy, for the super thanks. I see you all the time in the comments, so thank you so much for being here. That's awesome. And let us also look at our, oh, I guess that's everything. Yeah, so we can go and look through some of our data here. We can look at our D region absorption map to see where this X-ray flux from this 4.9 solar flare hit. It was over Australia, Southeast Asia. Let's check this out. This is pretty cool. And it just needs to load for us. Let me get it there. Boom, here we go. Okay, so here is our DRAP model, basically showing how we have attenuation of the D region of the ionosphere. And so this is all nighttime. The D region is the lowest region of the ionosphere. It doesn't exist at night. It only exists during the day when there's solar radiation coming in, like what we see here in this area. So there's always an amount of kind of attenuation a little bit, the highest frequencies because of the D region. But during a solar flare, like the one that we're going to be seeing here very soon, it goes up quite a bit. So we can kind of see some of these flare dynamics. And what this means is that there it is right there. So right over Southeast Asia and Australia. And basically, if you have a solar flare, you have a few different dynamics. A solar flare can dislodge a coronal mass ejection, this ejection of plasma, and that can launch towards the Earth. If that hits, the entire Earth is now experiencing a geomagnetic storm. The magnetic field swings will be stronger at the poles, but it's an entire planetary event, a geomagnetic storm. But a solar flare, the light radiation that it produces, these are light photons. They hit the Earth in just 8.3 minutes. They don't move around magnetic fields. They travel in a straight line. That hits the Earth, again, in less than 10 minutes. And that's always going to hit the sunlit side of the Earth. And so you just have to simply look at when the solar flare occurred and where was it daylight for you to figure out where that solar flare hit the Earth. And that's just going to be a transient increase in the ionosphere, the plasma of the ionosphere, which kind of does a lot of different interesting things. It's all part of the global electric circuit. And it's interesting, I'm actually reading a book, I'll probably talk about this a little bit later. I'm reading a book right now called Cosmic Patterns, and I'm going to start applying some of these principles to my space weather forecast. This is like a rare book, you can't really find it that easily, but I went ahead and dropped the money to pick it up, because this is what I do. And you know, there's some really kind of like, there's so much they didn't know back in 1950 when this guy first started doing shortwave radio forecasting. And then also he wrote this book in the early 70s. There's so much they did not know about the sun back then. And he'll like lay out these questions that we have clear answers to now, which is kind of funny. But there's also some really basic stuff that they understood, which I guess you could say I knew, but it was really nice to have it put very clearly into words, because it's like, oh, that's so simple. Why hasn't anyone else talked about it in that way? One example of that is the fact that we have the spring equinox coming up, or the March equinox. And this is when, because of the tilt of the Earth, all parts of the planet will receive equal light. 12 hours of light, 12 hours of darkness. And we have this thing called the Russell-McFerrin effect, where we know that there's heightened geomagnetic activity during the March equinox and the September equinox, and also in the month following. So that would be April and also October. The reason why, one of the dominant reasons, there's also like these solar wind dynamics because of the tilt angle of the Earth and Earth's magnetic field. But one of the reasons that J.H. Nelson here laid out, which makes perfect sense, is that this is the period of time when the ionosphere of the Earth is undergoing the most dramatic swings. Because, for example, during solstice, because of the tilt angle of the Earth, this part is always going to be receiving, let's say, radiation. And this part's always going to be receiving less radiation as it spins on the axis. And so things are fairly stable. There's a greater, like you could say, polarity difference, but things are stable. But as the Earth is rotating its orbit and it starts to go into this more perpendicular alignment, with this as being the Sun-Earth line right there, now you have both the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere going through pretty big swings in light. For example, like in the month of March, we're going to have probably an hour gained in terms of our sunset. Like sunset happening an hour later in the northern hemisphere, and the sun will be setting probably about an hour earlier from the beginning to end of March for the southern hemisphere. That's a pretty rapid swing in the amount of light radiation coming in. And so it's a really big shock to the ionosphere during that time frame. And it's the period of the most rapid swing in ionization for the different hemispheres. The northern hemisphere becoming more ionized, the southern hemisphere becoming less ionized. And because of the greater ionization of, or just in general, the kind of greater alterations to the ionosphere, if you do have some sort of solar storm impact, it can generate stronger electric field currents, which then are what you actually experience on the surface as it relates to a geomagnetic storm. Because it's electric currents in the ionosphere that trigger these powerful magnetic field swings on the surface. And so that's one reason why during the equinoxes you have stronger geomagnetic storms, especially if there is a solar storm impact. So a very basic way of looking at it, which sometimes I think we get lost in the details and all this cool stuff that we know. But back in the day, they had less to work with, but they knew it better. They just understood the fundamentals in many ways to a much better degree. He looked at planetary geometry to understand and to forecast disturbances. And he's laying out some very compelling data that I'm reading in this book. I'm going to see if I'm going to look at some new data sets for some really big storms that we've had, see if it lines up, and if it does, I may start using his methods. Flint Dibble disagrees with me. Who the heck cares? He probably doesn't know space weather or anything. So let us look also at our proton flux to see if there is any sort of change. Just have to get this loaded up. And I'll show you what has happened over the past 7 days or so. Not that much, but a little bit of a shift because of that plasma blast that we showed. So here we have our proton flux, and it has been low, basically nothing to write home about, but look at this shift right there. We have had an increase. It has cooled off a bit. This is our greater than 10 mega electron volt proton flux right here. Let me step over. So we see normal values are about 0.15 to 0.2. This is particles per square centimeter per second. But with this plasma blast, we had the greater than 10 mega electron volt go up to 0.5. So about a 3x increase. But it needs to go all the way to 10 to hit this warning threshold. And we didn't have any of the others bump up. So we have had just a slight increase in proton flux. Nothing really to write home about, but because we're doing the live stream, we're going through everything. I wanted to show that to you. We can go over to our X-ray flux to see what has happened with our most recent flare. Let us load this up. Here it is right there. That is our 4.9, and it looks like it's cooled off, but we'll just have to wait and see for like the next, the next day to see if we perhaps get some new activity kind of stimulated by that. Sometimes we see that with the sun. So it's really quite interesting how sometimes the sun will feed off itself in terms of its activity. There was a question that came in that says, can solar flares trigger us to have headaches? Yes, absolutely. That is something that, I have personal experience with, not every time, but it's possible. It depends really more so on your individual health at any given moment. And if let's say you're more stressed out, you have a greater sympathetic activation because of whatever, right? Stress at work perhaps, or because you've just been exerting yourself too much in other ways, whatever. You don't have a good diet, or you have nutrient deficiencies, or you've just been hammering the coffee and your adenosine receptors are all messed up, whatever. Yeah, these sort of enhanced energies can cause you to, have a headache. I talked about that in depth in a lot of my videos. After this live stream, I'll put all 3 video links in the video description for health effects of geomagnetic storms, health effects of EMFs, and health effects of solar activity. Each of them is like an hour-long lecture, so be on the lookout for that after the live stream. And let us look at this forecast for tomorrow. I forgot. Let us look at this because this is something that, according to quite a few different forecasters, we have coming in, this guy right there. And that is set to sweep by on the 23rd. Let's just kind of confirm. We can go perhaps right to when it hits us. Let's just set it for right there. And this is showing the 23rd at 8 a.m. Universal time. So actually just in about 5 hours according to this forecast. And this is Earth firmly in the dot, or in this coronal mass ejection. So this impact is perhaps even a little earlier. So yeah, we may be having this come in at any moment. We can go to our real-time solar wind, see if anything is looking odd, to see what the conditions are like. Conditions have finally cooled off. We have been having like low-grade geomagnetic activity for a while. I'm sure some of you remember that. This is the most recent pulse right here. But then after that, things finally cooled off. And so we see our real-time solar wind right now. And it looks like some little disturbances over the past 12 hours, but nothing really that crazy, I would say. Again, we see this, not just total flat line like nothing, but in general, a little bit of enhancement. Joe is asking, what are your personal practices during a solar flare geostorm? Well, in general, solar flares, it's the light radiation. And if you're on the nighttime side like I am right now, and there's a solar flare, it's not going to do anything for you, okay? Unless you have like some sort of quantum connection to the sun. I'm not going to discount that. But in terms of like the actual physics of the light hitting the Earth, if you're on the nighttime side and it hits the daytime side, right, because it's always going to, it's not going to affect you. But in terms of like a geomagnetic storm, something like that, it depends on the severity. If it's a really strong storm, sometimes you can't get away from maybe feeling it because it's just a shock to the system. The magnetic field of the Earth is really fundamental to our biology in a lot of ways. More ways than I can explain in this video, but I do in those other videos I just mentioned. But in general, being aware of this type of activity and seeing kind of the change, right? If you know that solar activity is going to start increasing because let's say you watch one of my videos, then you can take the steps necessary in putting your consciousness of like, well, maybe I shouldn't be stressing myself out as much, or maybe I should rest when needed. Like I have a philosophy of if I'm tired, I sleep or I nap, right? And most people don't do that. It sounds obvious and simple, but most people take like another coffee or something or an energy drink. Whereas if it's 3 p.m. and I'm tired and I need a nap, I'll just take a nap and I feel better. And so managing, and like I have a type of job where I can do that, you could say. But finding ways to work with your body as it actually is meant to. I mean, back when we were hunter-gatherers, generally, if you were tired, you could just go to your hut and lay down. They did a lot less work than we did, unless they were out on the hunt, basically, or gathering, foraging, whatever. But being very consciously like listening to your body is really important, and then just making sure you don't eat any trigger foods. Good clean water, spring water, fresh air, going outside, earthing and grounding. I talk about that all the time. Let me grab my shoes, because if, like, for example, my aunt called me last night and it was late, and so I went and decided to go for like an hour-long walk on the beach, and so that's a perfect time to go earthing and grounding. As get outside, fresh air, connecting to the electric currents and the potential of the Earth. And I didn't have to take my shoes off and deal with the sand in the dark or anything because I was wearing my new earthing boots, which are going to be on sale very, very soon. I'm just working on the final details. But these are awesome. I was walking around, it was great. Still had that barefoot feel. The other earthing shoes I sell on wildfreeorganic.com, these are the men's right here, and the women's I have in the room, too far away to grab. But these are also great. I walk all the time with these, and you can just go out and connect to the electric potential of the Earth. These work because they are completely natural. This is leather on the bottom. You have a copper plug right here. These probably look a little better here. You have a copper plug right there, and so you facilitate this energetic connection. Whereas if you're wearing rubber shoes, or even some of these other grounding shoes, they're still all rubber, and they have some fake-o plug that says it's conductive, but you're not going to actually connect to the electric potential. You need something that's completely all natural like these are. So these are on the website, wildfreeorganic.com. There's actually a sale right now, grand alignment, all one word, till the end of February. FYI. But that's what I do. That's what I do. I just manage my stress load. If, I was thinking about the ego yesterday and how the ego is such a silly thing. Like, one example relevant to this is, let's say you're on like a workout routine, right? You want to like really hit the gym and make some progress, strength, muscle, whatever, endurance, whatever. And you have this routine. It says Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday. That's your routine. You're supposed to do it. But if Wednesday comes around and it's a geomagnetic storm and you're already feeling beat up, like, do you just follow through with the routine or not? Like, you have to have some level of flexibility. And the ego will be like, yeah, bro, if you don't hit that Wednesday, like, it's all toast. It's done. It's over. But that's not true, because if you actually do that Wednesday workout and then you get the flu because you're too run down, that's going to set you back way more. So the ego is actually really silly when you think about it. It's really silly. It's quite stupid, actually. It's not the smart part of yourself, right? It's the stupidest part of yourself. So I think in many ways, being just aware of that will also save you from a lot of pain and suffering. And that's just the spiritual message in general. Someone just said they realize they have hairy toes. So let me see if there's anything else to report, and then we'll go into our question and answer. Hope is real too. Thank you for the super thanks. I could have been very emotional with mood swings today. Could the sun be a reason for it? Yeah, also emotions are very stressful. People underestimate sometimes the power of emotions, right? The endocrine system is a very, very powerful system throughout the body. It touches all the other ones. And we're super emotional animals. And so if your emotions are already heightened or volatile, and then there's some sort of solar activity that can make it worse. Conversely, you can also have solar activity because kind of ramp up your energy in your system, your metabolism, just because there's more energy in our environment and in our reality at that moment in time. The sun is our main energy driver. So if it goes through a burst of energy, you got to assume, right? You got to expect that there's going to be some sort of increase in energy overall for here on Earth, right? Across a whole bunch of different ways you can measure it. We talk about that on the channel. And with more energy, you have just kind of more reactions occurring in your body at the cellular levels, metabolic reactions, your overall metabolism goes up. You have maybe a little bit more free radical activity, just a little bit more volatility, powering your brainwaves, all this stuff. Like you could write a 5,000 page book on this, but you really don't need to understand it. So yeah, it can work both ways. But the biggest thing is if you apply consciousness to it and you're aware of it, that's the biggest thing. If you know you're emotional, then you can do what you need to feel better. If there's something that always makes you feel better, or just let's say going on a walk, fresh air, cooling off, right? Then do that. Do what you need to do. So if you have a question, please ask it in the chat at Stefan Burns. We will run through a few questions and then I'm going to sign off and leave you for the night. But we have a lot of solar activity right now. The sun's in chaos. It is in chaos for quite a while and will be for another couple years or so until the magnetic field stabilize. But there is seeing some sort of upsurge that is occurring right now, most recently with that 4.9 M-class flare, the strongest in more than 2 weeks. And that's on top of another M-class flare that occurred yesterday and this big plasma explosion that occurred and multiple plasma filaments that launch off too. You'll see those here on the sun. So Molly asks, what happens if you share a quantum connection with the sun? So this is a question that perhaps a lot of normal scientists would not even take or be able to answer because they haven't thought about it or they think it's like silly or whatever. But I think we probably all have a quantum connection with the sun because again, it is our main energy driver. It's just our main energy source in the solar system. And so not only do you and I have one, but for thousands, millions of years, right, Earth has been connected to the sun in this regard. And so it's like, it's not something that you build. It's so deep within us that it's impossible to escape. That's what I think. But in terms of building a stronger connection, like I can give an example. I was preparing for this live stream today and I already had it all planned out. And right as I was doing it, we had that M-class flare. And long-term viewers of the channel, like long-term viewers of the channel will know that I often have had live streams occur right when there's like, or I'll drop a video and boom, we'll get like an X-class flare or something. Like the timing is perfect. So you can also develop a relationship with the sun just by actually focusing on it. Like anytime I go outside, I say like, thank you, sun, right? Because we don't give thanks to the sun enough. Without the sun, again, we would all be dead. So I go outside, I see the sun, I say, thank you, sun. And I've built this connection. And that's, just, I think, the primary way to build this sort of quantum connection with the sun. And I've noticed really only good things from it. I think the sun is very aware and he's like, yo, I got you, bro. And he helps you out every now and then. So that's my perspective and story there. Leslie asked, will you go over neutrinos someday? Yeah, I mean, I've been studying into neutrinos quite a lot. They're very mysterious. The sun is emitting untold numbers of neutrinos all the time, but they're extremely low mass, like very, very low mass. They don't have a charge and they almost never interact with things. And so they're certainly important. And because they're able to not interact with things, some of them do though interact. Sometimes they interact in the atmosphere. Sometimes they interact in the ocean, like we just saw in the Mediterranean with that super high energy flux neutrino. Sometimes they interact in the Earth. Sometimes they interact at the core. So the fact that they do have this ability to, in general, not react, but sometimes they do, means that there is some number, we don't really know, but some number of neutrinos that's always hitting the core of the planet, or even like the outer core, deep parts of the mantle, contributing to some of the energy budget of the Earth itself. But there's quite a lot of ambiguity as it relates to neutrinos, so I don't talk about them too much because I kind of want to get my fingers around it a little bit more before I start talking about it more. But they're always being emitted from the sun in mass, and also the entire solar system, the cosmos, and they're constantly, like, I have the number, I think, on my other notepad. It's like 1 trillion is passing through like every square inch of your body every second, something like that. It's incredible. Jim is asking, is it conceivable that the asteroid that disappeared in the sun and the one that hit it carried elements which may be spread on the Earth in solar storms? So yeah, you have to think that, we have comets sometimes that fly into the sun. You can have asteroids that fly in. And an asteroid is going to be made up of, let's say, like a nickel iron alloy. Like, I just bought a little slice of one, actually. It's pretty cool. Check this out. Hopefully it's not too glary, but you can see the interesting lines on it. And I can actually get it to focus here for you if I click this. So I just bought this recently. I got it for way less than $280, by the way. So good on me. But this is actual nickel iron alloy. And there we go. And so yeah, it's going to smash in, but you have to keep in mind the size of an asteroid. The sun is massive, 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 massive. This would just immediately get blasted into different constituent ions, Fe2 plus or whatever, right? And we do see already these sort of heavier ions being emitted from the sun into the solar wind. But I don't think it would even cause a significant increase in them as we measure here on Earth. It would be negligible because, again, an asteroid is so small. You would need something pretty significant to occur, like Mercury, like going into the sun or something. But I mean, I think you're on the right track. What if you have a coherent connection with it? Yeah, that just means you have a stronger connection to the sun, and you can have that flow of energy and information if it's coherent. I'm not sure what you're trying to ask with this quantum connection thing. Everyone's going to be different. A lot of questions now. I have to kind of go back. As we enter the grand solar minimum, how will it affect the planet over the next 20, 30 years? Last time it happened, the London froze. Well, there's no indication that we are in a grand solar minimum right now. And so I know there's some people that toot that horn. They are in denial of reality, as a lot of people on this planet are. Now, there could be one. There could be one after this solar cycle. We don't know. I mean, the responsible thing is to look at what's happening right now. And we're going to look at the data. I'm going to pull it up right now for you. And also to be cognizant of the fact that we could enter into a grand solar minimum after this solar cycle. It's possible. Because we don't know what the next solar cycle will be like. You can start to predict things a little bit, but we just don't know. Here we have our solar cycle progression. We're looking at sunspots. We can also look at radial flux, the chart down. This is not a grand solar minimum. This is solar minimum, but you see that this is a Schwab cycle, a 12-year cycle, like this. Up, down, up, down, up, down. We're at solar maximum. We're not at solar minimum. Now, could perhaps this next solar minimum just lengthen out into a grand solar minimum, like the modern minimum? Yeah, it's possible. But as of right now, we can't expect anything other than solar maximum until 2027 or so, right? It'll start to go down, and we'll really be at solar minimum around 2032 or so. 2030, 2032, things are really cooling off. And then another question is, do you think ADAPT 2030 is correlated with the solar maximum? I know that's a channel, but I don't know what you mean by ADAPT 2030. A lot of people, they create thought forms and ideas, and they then give that to you. I do that to some degree, right? I have my own interpretations on what is happening, though I do my best to stick as close to the data and what we're seeing as possible, leaving open what could happen in the future, present different possibilities. We also examine what's happening in the past. Recently, we've been doing that, for example, with the different earthquake and volcanic activity in the Mediterranean, right? So I'll give it to you straight. But a lot of people create these idea and thought forms, and they really solidify them in their mind, and then they present that like it's absolutely going to happen. And we just, again, we don't know. We have to leave room open. We don't want the ego to slip in there all of a sudden and start, calling the shots, because if you leave it open, the end result's gonna be much better than you anticipated, hopefully, right? We have faith and trust in God. Reg is asking, have you checked out earthquakes north of Australia? No, but I haven't seen anything really that significant occurring there. No super high magnitudes. Are we going to maybe get a bigger Carrington event anytime soon? Again, something that we can't really forecast. If it happens, it happens. If we see a massive sunspot rotate into view or all of a sudden pop up on the sun, I will let you know. That's typically what you need for something like that. You need a massive sunspot, a big bundle of flux, more energy to it, then it can release that energy. And you also need the coronal mass ejection to hit the Earth. That's the other very important component. It needs to be very high velocity, needs to be supercharged, needs to slam in. Kasha Gems asks, can you charge crystals during high solar activity? Yeah, I would. If I had a house with a backyard, I'd be charging all my crystals outside. As it is already, they're already receiving a good amount of light. But yeah, I mean, that's something that you could specifically do, on super high solar activity days, especially on the daylight side. You could do that. These crystals work also more this kind of quantum realm, you could say. And so that's something that I've worked with a little bit. I would definitely recommend it. Molly's then goes on to say, if someone's able to understand their quantum nature relative to the sun, would they be able to create solar flares? I'm just going to read the question. I'm not going to answer it because you want to have like a philosophical discussion, and it's a little too individualistic for this live stream. Valerian asks, does living by a rake, liver, or beach amplify our human biofrequencies? Yeah, because you have these more natural frequencies in those natural areas, and we are part of that. So if you're in those sort of environments, in general, I find that to be very good for you. And yeah, is there specific research on like the biofrequency component of that? Not really, but tons of research out of Japan showing how time spent in green spaces is really good for you. And we know that that's good for your heart rhythms and overall like your cardiovascular system. And so your heart rhythms are your biofrequencies. So actually, in fact, yeah, it is good for your biofrequencies. Just sometimes people, they lose the language, right? They'll go straight into HRV jargon. Heart rate variability, but biofrequencies, same thing. Do you think the extra plasmic energy can quicken our perception of time? Yeah, I don't know. Does living, that's another repeat question, and more questions have rolled in. Could you explain those increased Van Allen belt layers? Better protection from sun activity, yay or nay? This is from Ronald. Well, we get these increased radiation belts after a really big geomagnetic storm, like a severe geomagnetic storm. Well, the radiation belts go from, let's say, 2 belts to like maybe 3 or 4. And that can last for a month, 2-3 months. We saw that back in May of 2024 with that big G5 storm. The radiation belts formed like this quadruple structure 2 months after. They were still there. Better protection from the sun? Not necessarily. These are very, very, very low density structures. The density of them is almost nothing. But there is more particles there now in this particle accelerator, right, which is the magnetosphere. And there's more then for them to dump into the global electric circuit effectively and cause greater energy swings. So I would say it's actually more like the opposite. If you did have some sort of impact afterwards, it's not necessarily going to be better protection from the sun. It's probably going to amplify things further. And then 2 more questions here. How do you think the lunar eclipse will affect the solar flashes coming on the 13th? Well, Naomi, I don't subscribe to a solar flash. I know a lot of people talk about that, but again, I think it's one of these thought idea forms that's being created that people keep feeding. And so it looks really solid and real for a lot of people, but is it going to happen? we don't know. Like fundamentally, if you strip all that away, we don't know. It's very similar with a lot of different fields in science. We make these kind of base discoveries and we start to wrap a lot of ideas and language around them, and we talk about them so long that a lot of people start to believe them to be absolutely true. But if you actually look at the base discovery, you realize that there's still a lot of room for interpretation from that. And that's why we have these scientific paradigm shifts every 50, 70, 80 years or something, because we find out the emperor's not wearing any clothes, right? And some people actually go back and look at it. They don't just take the assumption, they're like shocked at the truth of it. And there's a lot more room open there than people think. That's very much the deal with astronomy right now, and things like black holes and, you know, the Big Bang. People were 100% sure on the Big Bang. Now a lot of people are questioning it because of the James Webb Space Telescope and some of the discoveries that it's making in terms of how far back it's looking with its superior optics and stuff. So to kind of wrap up my answer for you is just every thought is an abstraction. This is from David Bohm, quantum physicist. I just really love this quote. Every thought is an abstraction. So anything that you're thinking fundamentally is not going to be 100% the truth. It may get close, but it's still going to be an abstraction on that. So put it a little bit more personally, you can have, let's say, some sort of disagreement with someone. You could think that you're 100% right, but whatever you're thinking in your head is still fundamentally going to be an abstraction from the truth of what actually occurred. And so maybe you're 99% right. Maybe you're 99% wrong. Who knows? But every thought is an abstraction. And then Molly's asking again, have the Earth's poles flipped? No, they have not flipped. A lot of people are talking about that increasingly. Because I think they just are trying to get attention. I don't know, but we have no evidence that they've flipped. They're still in their locations. I have a playlist on that on my YouTube channel called Earth's Magnetic Field. There's like a few videos in there that go in depth on all that. I recommend you watch that, Molly. So we'll wrap up with that. Thank you all so much for watching. We'll just have to wait and see how solar activity continues from here. Yeah, it looks like there's been a pretty significant shift with the sun just over the past 24, 48 hours. So thank you to all 2,000 viewers who are watching right now. That's incredible. That's awesome. And if you're new to the channel, hello, my name is Stefan Burns. Welcome. We talk about a whole bunch of stuff on this channel. We look at the sun. We also look at what's happening on the Earth, geophysically, geologically. For example, recently been looking really in depth at the Mediterranean, because we've had a whole bunch of activity there. Canopy Flagray, earthquake swarm, strongest in decades. Really mysterious and strong earthquake swarm off the coast of Santorini. We had these anomalous electromagnetic signals in Italy right before the earthquake swarm in Canopy Flagray. And we also sometimes look at what's happening with space and the cosmos. So I recommend you watch my video yesterday, which is on the planetary alignment that's coming up on the 28th of February. And a reminder that you can use the code GRAND ALIGNMENT, all one word, for 10% off any order right now at wildfreeorganic.com, where I have a bunch of holistic wellness products for you. So again, thank you all so much. Wishing you well, and I'll see you all very, very soon.